And a very good morning to you. We're live in London. You're listening to Monocle on Sunday. I'm Emma Nelson, and coming up, my guests will share their views on the week's biggest stories. Simon, Brooke and Rainbow Murray are joining me around the table. Simon, you look busy looking up stories to tell us about. What have you spotted?
Already, yeah, I'm interested, talking of Iran, I'm interested in the reaction in the US, in particular in Congress, and also in Trump's MAGA base.
How about you, Rainbow? What have you spotted?
I'm interested in the assisted dying bill, comparing it to the policies that we already have in other countries around the world.
Thank you very much for that. We'll also be getting the latest on Iran, and we'll hear the headlines from Bangkok.
This is James Chambers, Monocle's Asia editor, and I'll be joining the show a little later on to talk about the latest in Thailand, where the government is on a knife edge, and a few other stories that have caught my attention from around the region.
Thank you, James. Plus, we'll be hearing from our editorial director, Tyler Brûlé, who's enjoying the joys of a transparent bathroom in a hotel in San Sebastian. That's all coming up on Monocle on Sunday, live from London.
Live from London, this is Monocle on Sunday with Emma Nelson.
And a very warm welcome if you just switched on your radio, if you're going for a little run, or if you're listening to us at a later date in your week. Thank you so much for tuning in. It is a delight to be with you on this absolutely swelteringly hot Sunday in June here in London. Simon, Brooke, Rainbow Murray, how have your weeks been? Rainbow, hello.
Like everyone else in London, my week has been hot.
And how did you mitigate? How did you work around?
I am good at opening windows on one side and then closing them all and dashing off and opening on the other side wherever the sun is not beaming, and closing curtains and sucking ice lollies.
Wonderful. We love that. How about you, Mr. Brooke? A bit of that?
Well, I have a cold shower every morning anyway, so now it's a cold shower followed by a cold bath sort of midday when it gets too much. But what I'm also interested in is the fact that so many of my friends and neighbours are actually going into the office at the moment. You think, why would you want to brave the underground? Well, actually, they're going in for a bit of air conditioning. Why not?
Well, let us head to San Sebastian, where our editorial director, Tyler Brûlé, is standing by. So there's lots of references to keeping cool and having lots of washes, Tyler. A very good morning to you. How's your bathroom?
Good morning, Emma. From a rather cool San Sebastian. I think this is one of the reasons why this city, of course, has always been a bit of an escape for the Spanish from the heat. It's about 22 degrees, a little bit cloudy this morning, but just a perfect temperature. So for all of those listeners, baking in other parts of Europe and around the world, very sort of serene, beautiful, quite calm morning here this morning. As for bathrooms, I believe that architects, hotel owners, investors in property, whoever sort of decides they're going to take a wonderful old building and renovate it and then say, let's take whatever, it might have been 20 rooms, let's turn them into 10 rooms for our lovely little escape boutique hotel, and then we're going to put in glass bathrooms and fit them into all of these new suites that, of course, they've engineered. They need to be locked up, all of these people, because who wants to have an echoey glass box beside your bed? I mean, that's fine if you're staying on your own. If you're not, and listen, not everyone is Dutch in the world either. So, so I don't think everyone wants to sort of do their morning routines, etc., in the wide open. So this is an issue, and yet this is a global problem, Emma. This is happening everywhere. As of course we've had the boom. If you're not going to do Airbnb, we're seeing more people, refitting buildings, wanting to have their sort of short stay residences, etc. And it's just not appropriate or fit for modern life.
I'm wondering where the idea came from, because it's about 10 to 15 years that I first experienced the transparent bathroom, and we were on a family holiday at a hotel which had been once perfectly reasonable, but then had been renovated, and they had fit. The only way I could describe it was internal dormer windows into the bathroom, which could be only opened from the outside, which meant that the potential for surprise was wonderful, and it was great for everybody outside the bathroom and lots of fun, but not so great from the inside. So this has been around a while, hasn't it? And it's quite a pernicious trend.
It is. And do you really need daylight? And I think this is sort of the idea that you want to be able to bring daylight into bathrooms. I'm opting for privacy. I'm opting for good downlighters. I'm opting for good lighting around the mirrors. I don't need daylight. I don't need a porthole in 2 meters in diameter that peeks into the room. And yet, as you said, we've been living with this for a while. This hotel is new-ish. Of course, by the time I get back, I'm out in the middle of the city center. I hope my luggage will have been moved because I said this is not working.
I'm just asking my guests in the studio, Tyler, anybody else here had a transparent bathroom moment? Rainbow, you've yet to discover the joys of this. Simon, what have you found?
I'm completely with you, Tyler, absolutely. And transparent loo, even worse, definitely. But the other thing I really am not very keen on is when you have a bath or a shower actually in the bedroom itself. I mean, I suppose it sounds a bit louche and I don't know, whatever, but it just doesn't work, I don't think.
Which is worse?
Yeah, and listen. By the way, Simon, I'm throwing everything. We're talking, toilet, shower, bathtub, everything. This is, all behind glass, or sometimes, they might have a peekaboo curtain or something. I really don't get it. Aside from cost savings, and of course trying to wedge as many of these in as possible when you refit buildings. And as you were saying as well, hotels where it was perfectly fine before, when you enter the room, you might have your wardrobe, turn left, there's a proper bathroom with a door. That's fine.
It is. Maybe we're overestimating the benefits of a wall. I'm not sure. Have you been struggling with other things in the room, Tyler?
Oh yes, how you set me up. Well, this is the other problem. I think many people have experienced this, of course. There used to be, of course, the remote control, again, in the hotel room has always been a bit of a problem, and now it's even more problematic. In the world of course, of being able to stream various services, again, the good old days, Emma, and of course, given the new situation, which we're going to get to in a moment, of course, I wake up this morning, I want to, of course, see what's going on in the world, not just on my phone. I want to see it on a big screen. And you would think, dependably being in Spain, number one is going to be sort of TV España, right? And then there'll be maybe TVE 2, 3, 4, and 5, and the news channel, et cetera. Absolutely not. There's just an array of various apps and, of course, various buttons. And there's absolutely, and I don't think there are any traditional channels. But then I reach the Noticias, the news sort of widget, and then you're served up a whole bunch of channels, but most of them are sort of from right-wing outlets in the U.S. that you've never heard of, and then sort of various streaming from just news sources which have zero provenance. So this is also just an issue as well. I've just noticed increasingly when you want to just be able to get to the BBC, to get to France 24, to get to CNN, whatever your chosen news source is, very, very difficult. And then of course they're asking you to log in the room with various, of course with obviously your code for whatever your potential streaming service is. At that point, what's the point of having a television in the room?
I often find it even difficult to turn. When you walk into a hotel room and they've turned it on and you have no idea how to turn it off and you're ready to go to bed and you've just been using it as an extra light and you suddenly find yourself staring at a rather strange neutral landscape and unable to find the remote control. That's not so great. Simon is begging to contribute to this.
Can I just share, Tyler? I have to say I completely share your frustration with technology. I found it recently when I stayed in a hotel, even with the lighting. Instead of lights on, lights off, I was given an iPad which controlled the light in the hallway, the light in the bathroom, the light above the bed, whatever, which sounds wonderful, but it took me about half an hour, exhausted, wanted to go to sleep, half an hour to try and work out how to switch the lights off. In the end, I had to ring down to the front desk and say, look, could you just talk me through this or whatever? Perhaps I'm an idiot, I don't know, but you just don't need that, do you?
Do they still have light switches in San Sebastian?
They well, in this room, but yes. What happened to the good old classic ceramic Berker switch? Just
bring it
switch
back.
It on, switch it off. Maybe hold it down a little bit if you want to just dim the room. That's the other one I don't want. I don't want someone to choose my mood settings for me because it'll generally none says bad mood because the problem is their version of what sort of is maybe lounge or sort of evening ambient is still too bright. So you just want to say, can I just control the dimmers rather than having all of these crazy presets as well? And we don't need a tablet because what happens once you go to the mini bar, you've had a few peanuts, your fingers are greasy, and then it doesn't work on the iPad. So then Simon's sort of stuck with an overlit room.
Tyler, what else takes you to San Sebastian? We're going to have to bring in the Iran story in a minute because obviously it's something we do need to touch on
very quickly.
But what else takes you to San Sebastian other than a rather thorough examining of what seems to be a hotel that doesn't quite know its audience?
Well, I'm actually here heading up the coast for the Biarritz Film Festival. Number of premieres happening there. So I sort of got down to this stretch of the Atlantic a little bit early, but we'll be there from the start of the week, and maybe reporting in from there. And then, Emma, later in the week, well, I mean, actually, are you getting on a train right after this? Because you kick off in Paris. I mean, this is very much a French week for us, isn't it?
It is. I am literally on the way to the Eurostar directly out of this, and we'll be doing the briefing and the daily every single day out of our wonderful location in Rue Bachaumont in the 2nd arrondissement in Paris. So I look forward to seeing you then. Stay with us if you can.
I will see you then. I will see you Wednesday, indeed.
Okay, I shall look forward to it. And in the meantime, let's touch on what is happening in Iran at the moment. I think the headlines are being dominated by the fact that the United States has completed an attack on 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordo, Natanz and Esfahan. Donald Trump has said a full payload of bombs was dropped on the primary site of Fordo, congratulating the great American warriors. He said, Iran has said that we have everlasting consequences to face from this. And there have been a fresh wave of strikes between Iran and Israel. Let's hear now from Sanam Vakil, who's director of the Middle East and North Africa programme at Chatham House. And also Andrew Mueller joins us, our contributing editor and host of the Foreign Desk. A very good morning to you. Sanam, let me just bring you in straight away. Do we have an idea of the scale of what's happened overnight?
Well, I think what's most serious is, of course, that the United States has hit Iran and done so to perhaps get the job done. And President Trump has tried to telegraph these strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. He warned the Iranians in advance, ultimately because I do think he doesn't want to get dragged into a broader war, but wanted to declare victory on, quote unquote, ending Iran's nuclear program. Iran is, of course, faced with limited options, including immediately entering negotiations. Secondly, it can try to choreograph its own response against U.S. facilities, particularly empty ones. And thirdly, of course, it could try to escalate and take a response to the region, but that would be very dangerous.
Andrew, let's bring you in straight away. This idea of what Iran does next is something that people are sort of like barely fathoming at the moment, given when the news broke, and I think it was sort of like middle of the night here in the United Kingdom, that there was a real sense of disbelief. I think is probably quite a good way of describing it.
Yeah, Iran's options, though, at this point, and this is doubtless a part of the United States calculations, Iran's options are extremely limited, and they are certainly not what they might have been a year or two ago. We've seen its proxy network across the Middle East largely dismantled. Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis are not what they once were. Assad is in exile in Moscow. Iraqi militias have been substantially constrained, and just from what we've seen in the last few weeks, the precision, and indeed in the last few days, the precision with which Israel has been able to target Iranian sites and indeed Iranian individuals suggests that the Iranian regime is pretty clearly riddled with Israeli intelligence, and Iran also appears to have next to no air defenses to speak of. I think Israel so far has lost 1 drone in a little over a week of doing this. So Iran's options are limited. If they negotiate now, they look weak, and indeed they are weak. If they strike US bases, then they are, as President Trump has pretty clearly telegraphed, inviting an even more substantial response. And the regime itself knows that in large parts of Iran, especially in the capital and especially among younger people, it is not popular. And they will be worried that a miscalculation at this point could bring the whole edifice tumbling down.
Sanam, could you explain to us to what degree the military action that we saw last night will actually put an end to Iran's nuclear program, given the fact that the warnings from Iran is that there will be everlasting consequences. But are we looking at no nuclear program now?
Well, the Iranians have said that the damage wasn't as extensive. We have to wait and see what the International Atomic Energy Agency confirms here. So far, they've only been confirming that there's, excuse me, no radioactive spread or transfer, which is, of course, important for civilian populations. Iran has also said that it's moved a lot of its enrichment to other locations. So, we could well see an Iranian response where it leaves the non-proliferation treaty. I don't anticipate that it will immediately try to weaponize its program. These are some very alarmist scenarios that are looming out there. We just have to see if there is a possibility of a negotiation where Iran's program, or what remains of it, can be regularly monitored and verified by the IAEA or other international bodies. And that's what's important to try and secure in order to maintain Iran's commitment to not weaponize its program.
Sanam, thank you so much for that. I understand you have to dash off. You're probably having a phenomenally busy morning. Andrew, staying with you for this one. I mean, the fact remains is that we had a 2 weeks grace that was given by Donald Trump, which he doesn't seem to have adhered to in any shape or form. Why has that happened?
Well, in minor fairness to President Trump, he didn't actually say at any point, I will make the decision in 2 weeks definitively at exactly that point. He sort of suggested Iran had a 2-week window within which to operate. And it is also possible that that was intended to at least buy the United States some amount of time and some element of surprise, and that the decision had already been made. I mean, it's a fundamental of warfare that you don't telegraph your precise intentions in advance. What is also going to be interesting is how this shakes out among his own base. He has, of course, spent more than a decade now running for president, decrying American involvement in stupid wars, as he put it, in the Middle East. His own actual record, i.e. what he does rather than what he says, doesn't necessarily bear that out. He did, of course, order those airstrikes on Syria in 2017. But he did say again at his inaugural address, when sworn in for the second time earlier this year, that we will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars that we end, and perhaps most importantly, the wars we never get into. And that's why I was struck by the way he made the announcement. Usually when a president makes an address to the nation of this sort, they're sitting there by themselves. This time he clearly very deliberately flanked himself with his vice president and his secretaries of state and defense. And I think that's a way of, he's signaling to the MAGA base that we're all on board here. And Vance especially has been extremely skeptical of American adventures in the Middle East. And also he's doing that thing of tagging them with it. They can no longer get out from under this if it all goes askew.
Mueller, let's wait a second, because actually I think we do have a small clip of that announcement that was made a few hours ago.
A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime, Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
That was Donald Trump, and in quite an enormous setting, as Andrew has just mentioned, the fact that he was flanked by his senior officials. It was a presidential address. Simon, you've been following the reaction of Trump's base in the United States, haven't you, in the last couple of hours?
So naturally, obviously, well, the Democrats are not happy about it. Interesting, just reading a piece by Katie Balls, who's recently moved to Washington for the Sunday Times. She's reporting that Steve Bannon, the founder in a way of MAGA, had lunch with Trump last week. Apparently, Bannon had already sounded the alarm, but he said that he can get MAGA on board if Trump explains why to his base why he's doing this. Also, Katie Balls explores to what extent Trump is isolationist. She quotes a historian, Victor Davis Hanson of the Hoover Institution think tank, part of Stanford University, which says Trump is neither an isolationist nor an interventionist, but rather transactional. So it will be interesting to see how he can show to his MAGA base, look, this is not me committing to another forever war. There is actually a cold logic here, which will bring tangible benefits to the US.
Rainbow, your take on this, given the fact that Simon has just mentioned the idea that values are not a massive priority for Donald Trump, and yet he's managed to get himself entangled in one of the most complicated wars.
Yes, I mean, you could also say he's an opportunist, that he said now is a good opportunity to take down a long-standing adversary because Israel has done all the groundwork for us. So now we can come in with one quick sweep, drop a few bombs, and then walk away again. I don't think Trump has a massive appetite for prolonged conflict in the Middle East, and even if he did, his base certainly doesn't. So I think what he's hoping is one quick show of strength will be sufficient to get Iran to capitulate, which he can then chalk up as victory.
We've seen, staying with you, Rainbow, a lot of countries come out in the last couple of hours against this strike, the usual suspects. And we've also seen the Houthi rebels in Yemen saying that this is actually a declaration of war against the United States. Europe's been really quiet on this one, and the United Kingdom in particular finds itself in a nigh on impossible situation, doesn't it, here? So the international politics of this are now very, very sensitive.
It is very, very sensitive. Yes, I mean, the UK's response has been diplomatic, I suppose, is the best way of putting it. Keir Starmer had previously made it clear that what the UK wanted to see was de-escalation in the region. I don't think anyone could call last night's events de-escalation, but he didn't condemn it either. Obviously, he wants to stay on the right side of the US, so sort of standing by the allies. But I don't think there's any appetite in the UK or in the rest of Europe to get their hands dirty in this conflict. I think everyone is already sufficiently concerned about Russia and the conflict in Ukraine. So I think there's going to be quite a lot of anxiety about how best to handle this and avoid this turning into another global conflict.
Indeed. And Mueller, let's bring you back in on that point, the avoiding being dragged into something that you don't want to. Earlier on this week, there were several warning messages being sent out about how any kind of action from the United States needed to have a clear and defined time limit on it, that they needed to have a clear strategy on it, given the fact that immediately people were starting to say, we must learn the lessons of Iraq.
Yeah, I think there's been a reflexive temptation for a lot of people, especially those habitually critical of the United States, to immediately revert back to the events of 22 years ago. But I don't think, or at least I kind of hope, the situations are comparable in a lot of respects. I mean, nobody, not even the most sharp-beaked Iran hawk, is talking about invading Iran. So that, I think, is not a realistic option. But I think it is the case that, the United States has been habitually tempted over the last 30 years by the idea that it can all be done with barely opposed air power. And almost every deployment of such, as we've seen, Bosnia, Kosovo, Libya, among others, has turned out to be a lot more complicated than anybody necessarily thought at the time. It is just a truism of history that however advanced the technology gets, and however weak your opponent appears to be, armed conflict is always a great deal easier to start than stop.
And staying with that, Mueller, the consequences now, the options for Iran are, already has been mentioned asymmetric warfare, which is when everything becomes so much more destabilised.
It does, and that may be a temptation for Iran because their more orthodox options are limited, both in terms of what they can actually launch and their ability to cope with retaliation, because it would now be retaliation from the United States, not just Israel. We have seen once or twice in the past, in both conflicts or near conflicts involving Iran and Israel and Iran and the United States, an amount of preordained theatre, i.e. there's been attacks that have been launched which have clearly been telegraphed in advance, so it was organised so Iran in particular could say, look, we've retaliated, we can call it a draw now. I think, however, we may be beyond that kind of thing. And even the idea of unleashing semi-deniable proxy attacks whether they're on American or European interests around the world. Iran probably, well, I hope, understands now that anything like that happens, whether they say they had anything to do with it or not, they will be blamed for. So again, going back earlier to what was being said about Trump being very transactional, that may be the reason that this has appealed to him, is that he does not believe that Iran has any good options, and they don't. I mean, I am reminded of a conversation I had with a European foreign minister at GlobeSec the other weekend, just as Israel strikes were getting underway, and he just said Iran's big problem is ultimately that nobody likes them. And it's true, they don't actually have any allies. Russia has made it clear that it doesn't really want anything to do with this. China is sure as hell not going to get involved, and it is always, I think, often forgotten that neither Russia nor China wants Iran to have a bomb either. They were both signatories to the original JCPOA.
This makes it much more risky. Rainbow, let me bring you in on an article that the New York Times has already come in by talking about the commentary, the long-term effects of this. And we do need to look at what's happening next. And it's a op-ed from David Sanger, who's a White House and national security correspondent. He's made the point that actually the United States has done absolutely everything it can to not do what Donald Trump did last night. It's used sanctions, sabotage, cyber attacks, even negotiations to try to make sure that Iran's nuclear program is limited, if not taken out. This now completely changes the narrative, doesn't it? And if you do have an Iran of limited resources and vowing eternal consequences, the only thing that you can expect is that nuclear program, which at the moment is obliterated, will be started, but it will be done underground.
Yes, there is absolutely the risk that it's going to go underground, but I think that might be of a more long-term problem, and I think Trump is not necessarily thinking about beyond his current presidency. Iran is weak in a way that it hasn't been previously, so I'm not sure it's necessarily appropriate to compare what America is deciding right now with their previous strategies, because as we've noted, a lot of the proxies that Iran has relied on within the region are in a weakened state. Israel has been doing a lot of damage this past week, so Iran is not in a position to bite back the way it may previously have been, and therefore perhaps the USA felt this was the moment to change strategy and to stomp on an adversary whilst they could get away with it.
Simon?
I completely agree, Rainbow. As you were saying earlier, Trump being an opportunist is seeing Israel in the ascendant now, isn't he? So that's presumably one of the reasons he has dived in. I just wanted to put this in a historical context, though. If you look at the relations, the effect of Iran on US politics, I mean, it was 1979, wasn't it, that the Iranian hostage crisis did for Jimmy Carter. He was not re-elected because of the mess his administration made getting those American hostages out of Iran. Ronald Reagan, his successor, got in trouble with the Iran-Contra deal, which, nearly scuppered his presidency. George W. Bush, when Andrew was mentioning the invasion of Iraq, when that happened, Iran was really key in destabilising the country afterwards. And of course, Biden did his best with the October the 7th atrocity, but certainly that, the way he handled it, could not have helped his presidency and his re-election prospects. So Iran is really difficult for US presidents. And the other thing, the Bloomberg this morning is just now reporting their one of their Middle East experts just looking at where we go from here and pointing out, obviously, there's been a lot of jostling already to succeed the frail 86-year-old leader, but Dina Esfandiri, who is the Middle East lead for Bloomberg Geoeconomics, is suggesting that actually this could be some younger, more ideological cohort of officials who could actually succeed him. So we could be in a worse place.
Andrew, just look at the long term for us with this one, because we've all talked about the immediate opportunistic moment that Trump has seized now, yet one wonders what kind of conversations and indeed what actions we are going to see in 10, 20 years' time. This really is a shift of a tectonic plate, isn't it?
With that kind of timescale applied to a region like the Middle East, literally anything could happen. I mean, we will hear a lot in the next hours and days, I'm sure, of the kind of messianic optimistic tendency, this idea that sowing this amount of chaos in Iran will bring the Islamic Republic tumbling down, and that from that will emerge, a great democracy worthy of a great nation. I think it would be delightful if that happened, but I wouldn't overinvest in it. Nevertheless, there is an element of truth to it. I think one of the great frustrations of people contemplating the Middle East, and it's a frustration shared by a great many Iranians, is that there is no earthly reason why Iran could not be a wealthy and prosperous and constructive country. It is geographically enormous. It has a large and educated population. It has all the natural resources that avarice could desire. It could absolutely be an extraordinary country, and it absolutely has been hobbled short of that for a long time now by the people running it. But as we have learned, or apparently have not learned, engineering regime change in the Middle East and expecting easy and positive outcomes, well, it requires a sustenance of optimism that it sort of goes beyond marvellous and into the realms of eccentricity, really.
Andrew Mueller, our contributing editor and host of the Foreign Desk, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks too to Sanam Vakil, director of the Middle East and North Africa programme at Chatham House. And thanks too to our editorial director, Tyler Brûlé, who joined us at the top of the programme. You're listening to Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson. Joining me around the studio table, Simon Brooke and Rainbow Murray. And we head now to Bangkok. James Chambers, Monocle's Asia editor. A very good afternoon to you. How are you?
I'm fine, Emma. I was interested to hear about you talk about the weather and how hot it is your way, but of course it's always 30 plus here, so we learn to cope. Okay.
Any advice for us poor weaklings in the United Kingdom who are just sort of floored by this big ball in the sky?
I guess embrace shops that have aircon, but also don't be afraid to sweat. I think
Excellent.
You just get over the embarrassment here, then you find yourself just cooling down because there's plenty of effort put in just trying to avoid sweating. But if it's just a matter of fact, then you find yourself getting a lot cooler about it.
Am I right in thinking that you're the place that does talcum powder rather magnificently?
Well, I mean, they do sell it in the 7-Elevens where you can get changes of clothes.
Excellent.
Just in case.
Excellent. Right. Okay. Tell us where you are and what you're up to and what you spotted.
Well, I guess the big story here in Thailand is the government hanging by a thread. We've had a couple of years of glorious stability here, where we haven't been talking about the government falling, any resignations or potential coups, but now that's back in the news, and it's all come about in most recent weeks because of a border dispute, a long-running border dispute that Thailand has with Cambodia, two neighbours, friends and enemies, and the Prime Minister here, Paetongtarn Shinawatra, who's Thaksin's daughter. She called up Hun Sen, who's basically like the de facto leader in Cambodia, privately last Sunday to try and kind of get relations back on an even keel. He recorded the chat and then leaked it, and it's really embarrassed the Prime Minister because it looked like she was kowtowing to Cambodia. And Thailand is the big cheese in this part of the world. It's about 70 million people in Thailand compared to about 17 in Cambodia. So it's a bit like the UK and perhaps the Netherlands. So anyway, that didn't look kindly on her. Everyone has gone crazy, and she's being asked to step down. One of the big parties, or the biggest party in their coalition after Pertai left on Wednesday, and now everyone's waiting to see who else is going to leave. The next biggest party has basically offered her an ultimatum, saying if you don't resign, then we're out. So we're all waiting to see what happens next.
There are always vultures circling around the Prime Minister, aren't they? Given the fact that her background, her context, the way she came to power, her comparative inexperience is always something that they've been, very quick to seize upon. This conversation with Hun Sen was clearly internationally could be perceived as quite a mistake.
Well, yes, but not a surprise. I guess she's in her late 30s. She's very young and she's a political novice. We all knew this when her father, put her in the job. So I guess it was just a matter of time before some kind of mistake like this came up. What is quite interesting is that her father has been playing a very, very prominent role in Thai politics, even though he's not meant to be, up until this point. And yet suddenly she was handed this job of calling up essentially a family friend. Thaksin, her dad, and Hun Sen go way back. They're old friends. Hun Sen has provided Thaksin and his sister Yingluck kind of safe passage when they got kicked out of Thailand. So I guess it's it was naive of Pai Tongtan, the Prime Minister, to think that she wouldn't get played by a wily old character like Hun Sen, but you can understand why. She calls him up, addressing him as uncle, asking him how he is. But he's been in position for decades for one reason, and he knows how to play politics. So it will have surprised her. It will have embarrassed her. It might backfire on Hun Sen, actually, because who can trust him now? Who will have a conversation with him? And I guess the saddest thing beyond Thailand's domestic politics is this has compromised any hope of peace between Thailand and Cambodia. The Prime Minister, she's hanging on. She's been accused of kind of selling Thailand out and compromising sovereignty. And so obviously her reaction has been to double down on that. They've recalled the ambassador, her party, Per Thai, now threatening today to downgrade diplomatic ties with Cambodia. And the army, the Thai army, have been shutting borders repeatedly in the last few days. So, what was or what is a domestic crisis also has an international aspect to it. And given the conversations you've been having with, Andrew Mueller about what's happening in Iran and obviously what's happening in Ukraine, it'd be so sad to see, these two neighbours, go down that line too.
Let's move on to another story about the social niceties of your part of the world. The Private Members Club is a pretty big provision. It's very important in the likes of Hong Kong and Singapore. Singapore is experiencing trouble, though.
Yes, I guess, the Private Members Club is probably something that must have been exported from the UK. But as you said, these old colonial cities like Hong Kong and Singapore had their own very storied ones. But towards the end of last decade, there was this kind of trend for a new type of, members club along the kind of Soho House lines. And one of the pioneers of that movement was a club called 1880, which opened in Singapore about 2017, 2018. And it really set off this trend that we saw kind of, move into Hong Kong and it's been in Bangkok. But I was down in Singapore last week with our editor, Josh Fennett. We were visiting the city to kind of catch up with it after six years away. And this club, this Pioneer 1880, suddenly closed down. It entered liquidation. So that was a huge shock to everyone in Singapore. And obviously they're trying to work out what went wrong. And it follows the club's Hong Kong outpost closing a few months ago. And it seems like it was actually the Hong Kong business that might have dragged it down. It was tempted to enter the city with, a landlord who was willing to pay for all the kind of capex and fit out of the club, but actually it couldn't afford to pay the high rents. And obviously there's a lot of competition. So Hong Kong went first, and that seems to have dragged the Singapore club under. And so there's a lot of people in Singapore who are worried about the industry and the demand for these clubs, but it seems like the ones who are left standing still seem to be in good health in Singapore, and they are planning their own international expansions themselves, although I imagine they'll be a bit more guarded now.
James, finally, talk about Japan, a pretty law-abiding nation. Well, it has a reputation for being thoroughly upstanding. Not the case when it comes to air conditioners.
Yeah, this is a story that I thought was quite appropriate for these, at hot temperature times. It comes out of the Asahi newspaper. And as you quite rightly said, Tokyo and Japan is a very law-abiding place. So any kind of crime wave makes the headlines. But this story is the kind of rise in theft of outside or outdoor air conditioner units. So you may not be so familiar with the kind of setup of air conditioners in the UK, where they're not very popular or common. But here, every building has hundreds of air conditioning units on the outside, and obviously air conditioning units on the inside, which you can control in every room. But it's the outdoor ones, which are very, you can very much get access to them, which have been kind of looted by Japanese thieves. And this crime wave has kind of exploded from about a few hundred units in 2020 to like 3,000 odd last year. So it seems to be doubling every year. And the police seem to be putting it down to the rise in copper prices. So I think people will be paying a bit more attention to the air conditions outside of their homes, not just inside.
Indeed. Just let's talk us through the logistics of this thing, because stealing a bottle of water on a hot day is not nice, but it's pretty simple and straightforward to do. But to actually shift an air conditioner must require quite a lot of... Well, it must require you to break into a bit of a sweat, for starters.
Well, yeah, so wouldn't be surprising to say that this crime wave is happening more in the suburban areas of the greater Tokyo area rather than downtown. So yes, there's not, our bureau chief Fiona is not going to be walking down Shibuya looking at people trying to steal the units off our bureau or other buildings in the vicinity. This is outside of town, where you won't have the same level of footfall on the streets, you won't have the CCTV. So I guess the thieves are a bit more emboldened to bring their ladder along and kind of unscrew one of these units. And it does sound like they're not trying to steal the unit to put in their own house, because obviously to make it work you need both sides, you need the external and the internal. They're just taking it down to the scrap man and trying to sell it for a few bob.
Incredible. James Chambers, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Bangkok. Quite a story coming out of Japan there, Rainbow. The idea that you have to shin up a ladder to get the outside part of an air conditioner.
What a hot story. Yes, you must be quite desperate, I think, to be willing to do that. And as you said, it's not a very subtle crime. You're quite visible. So I guess people must be feeling emboldened or just so desperate that they're willing to take the chance.
Or just once they've done it once, Simon, they just think, fine, let's whiz up and let's get the ladder out and go and do it. It is incredible.
If you did see somebody standing up a ladder doing something to an air conditioning unit, perhaps I'm just naive, I would assume they're fixing it, not stealing it. So perhaps is it an easier thing to steal?
It's amazing what a high visibility vest can do.
Get away with anything.
For the criminal underworld. 9:43 here in London. You're listening to Monocle on Sunday. Joining me around the desk this morning, I've got Rainbow Murray, Professor of Politics at Queen Mary University of London, and Simon Brooke, journalist and communications consultant. But we head now to Switzerland, because Zurich's Migros Museum for Contemporary Art is among many institutions that were basking in the glory of the world's attention being focused on Zurich and Basel this week. Well, Monocle's Chris Chermak caught up with its co-director Patrick Ilg at Dufourstrasse 90, our Zurich headquarters, and Chris began by asking Patrick to describe the museum.
The Migros Museum für Gegenwartskunst, for 30 years now. We were established in 1996. We're a museum for contemporary art here in Zurich at Löwenbräu Kunst. And as it is inherent with contemporary art, we discuss a lot of the pressing issues of our current time, always based from the art. We launched this discussion not only with our exhibition, but also with our programs. We have a lot of workshops, performances, artist talks, roundtables. And also for a broader public, we have guided tours, we have school workshops, we have family afternoons. So everybody can engage with the art, but also with the important issues we need to talk in today's society.
Now, for our listeners who are not in Switzerland, they would probably not know that Migros is a supermarket chain here, which is what makes this in part interesting. The fact that Migros as a supermarket group has a museum. Tell us even how that comes about. You were telling me earlier before we started that many people will first wander in thinking they're going to a supermarket museum, but of course it's not. It's about contemporary art. Where did that come from?
Yeah, there is no supermarket produce to be seen at our museum, but The relation to the supermarket actually comes from our collection with around 1,600 contemporary art pieces. And the foundation stone of this collection was set up by the founder of the supermarket, Gottlieb Duttweiler. He was a big philanthropist, and among many social and cultural initiatives he started, he also bought art from aspiring artists to support their career. And this collection grew over the years and grew and grew, and now it really is a professionally managed collection with so many artworks. And our museum and the collection are still part of it's called microculture percentage. It's a big investment the Micro Group does for many social and cultural initiatives, and we're part of this.
Is this a way for, would you say, do you feel part of sort of a supermarket chain like Migros trying to be part of the fabric of society in Switzerland, the cultural role sort of here in Zurich? Is that part of the motivation, do you feel, to kind of not just be a supermarket, but actually be a part of the conversation and contemporary society here in Zurich?
Yes, and I think it's not even just trying, but it is a really substantial investment in society Migros does with this investment.
One of the reasons we're obviously here, we've been broadcasting out of Zurich through this week, is because there is so much going on in the world of art for this week. We have, of course, Art Basel going on, but we also before that had Zurich Art Weekend, and that was something that you were particularly involved in. It's sort of this chance for Zurich to showcase itself before Art Basel begins. Tell us what you were up to in Zurich Art Weekend.
Yeah, it was a super intense weekend. We had many performances going on at the museum. We had artist talks, we had guided tours. And what I really love about those 3 days, the museum or the entire Löwenbräu Kunst, it was buzzing. It was filled with people coming and going, looking at art. And to me, this is actually the natural state of a museum, full with people coming and going. And I think Zurich Art Weekend is a great initiative, as it shows that when we all work together, it's much more than we try to work alone. And it's great that all Zurich institutions working together managed to give a surplus to visitors to Art Basel, also to come to Zurich and really have a great art experience.
And for those who were not able to make Zurich Art Weekend, if they were to come to Zurich now, tell us, what would they see? What is the current exhibition at Migros Museum?
Yeah, I hope they join us at Migros Museum. After all, we have free admission at all time. And what you currently see until the end of July is a group exhibition. It has loans, but also a lot of works from our own collection. And the title of the exhibition is Accumulation. Accumulation sheds a critical look at the capitalistic narrative of constant growth that lies beneath almost everything we have in this society. But it does not point fingers at people, but more of tries to raise one or two eyebrows. The artworks look at traces that this constant growth leave everywhere. For example, in our environment, in the nature, but also how this growth reproduces colonial structures every day. And at the same time, the exhibition has not only this intellectual approach, but also just when you enter, there's artwork called Money Box by Gianni Motti, and everyone who enters just goes, wow. So we can also enter the exhibition with a lot of emotions and live a poetic moment.
Are you able to describe in any way Money Box?
I think you should come by and see it yourself.
You will be surprised when you arrive at the Migros Museum for that. Finally, Patrick, just tell us what's coming up after that. We understand there will also be a solo exhibition coming up from a South Korean artist.
Yes, we have, starting at the end of September, Berlin and Seoul-based artist Hegi Young with a survey exhibition. It is actually the first survey exhibition here in Switzerland. And the theme behind the exhibition is migration, where she stems from her own personal experience, but also from the rich historical context. And visitors can expect a multi-sensory exhibition. It has installation, it has videos, it has sound, it has wallpapers. So there's a lot of different things to feel, see, hear.
And that was Patrick Ilg talking to Chris Chermak in our Zurich studio. You're listening to Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson, Simon Brooke and Rainbow Murray. Rainbow, you wanted to bring in the story about assisted dying. It's been a huge story here in the UK on Friday with the government, with Parliament voting in principle to endorse people's right to go for assisted dying. Globally speaking, where does this now sit?
Well, we're certainly not the pioneers of this. We are joining a select group of countries who already have some legislation on this and some more who are thinking about it. So we've just been listening to our correspondent from Switzerland. The Switzerland's are actually the global pioneers. They introduced this legislation in 1942 when World War II was in full rage. They thought, you know what, everyone else is sort of dying against their will. We should allow people to die voluntarily as well if they so wish. So, people have been able to access assisted suicide already in a number of European countries, including Switzerland, also Belgium, the Netherlands. Spain have recently introduced legislation on this, certain states within the USA and Canada. France approved it in principle earlier this year as well. Around the same time they were debating it as in the UK. Ireland are looking into it. So it's becoming a more accepted norm now that if your quality of life has gone with no prospect whatsoever of ever getting it back, that people should have the capacity to decide for themselves whether they want to suffer till the end or whether they've had enough.
And it is about quality of life, isn't it, Simon? And one of the big arguments against any change here in the United Kingdom was that palliative care, the care for people who are desperately ill, has not been up to scratch, especially care for older people in the UK.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's interesting that Gordon Brown, former UK Prime Minister, was saying that actually if you do engineer a situation, which you might well be doing, where you have a right to assisted dying, what you don't have a right to is really good quality end of care life palliative care. So it's one of these issues. I'm not sure where I stand on this. I'm fascinated by the subject, but one thing I do hope might happen is that it might kickstart a real bit of soul searching in not just the UK but other countries around the world about palliative care, about end of life care, and just trying to make it better. We've changed over the last couple of decades from a situation where doctors would do anything, wouldn't they? If an 80-year-old had cancer, right, pump them full of chemotherapy and, bravely they'll fight on, to saying, well, actually, in terms of quality of life, it's better if we just withdraw that, that medication or whatever. But hopefully people will think long and carefully about what we can do to improve the situation so that people have a good death.
Let's move on to a lovely story. Let us sort of switch direction quite radically to an article in the New York Times, which has brought everybody's attention to the skyline above one of Italy's most beautiful places, Florence. If you look across Florence, you will see the Duomo by Brunelleschi. You'll see a very beautiful bell tower by Giotto. You'll see the Piazza della Signoria, but you will also see a really big crane, but not for much longer. It's funny, Simon, that you picked this story up. That we've been to Florence once or twice, and I never remember the crane until you tell me, and you're like, oh yes, of course, there's the crane.
I didn't either, which is really odd. Is it just that you expect to see this kind of building work, restoration work in Florence? I'm not sure, really. I do remember the first time I went to Venice being very disappointed to see that in front of the Basilica they had scaffolding and hoardings, and I was told that it had been there for nearly 30 years or whatever, so goodness knows what was going on there. But I suppose, it will definitely be better, according to the Times, for instance, when the man who dismantled it, Mr. Signora Roberto Amadori, had done so. There was a cheering crowd when I had finished. He said, an elderly woman rushed up to me and said, Florence shines once again, which is a lovely idea, isn't it?
Although there is the online community has gone rather bananas for this, because apparently they gave the crane her own feed on some platform and they called her a her, and they said that she had her own personality. So they've even sort of tried to imbue a little bit of romance into this.
Well, you can try. But at the end of the day, a crane is a crane. It's an eyesore. It doesn't belong amongst all these monuments. And I think the I would like to think that most people would probably be glad that it's gone. But people always have mixed feelings about sort of juxtaposition of the old and the new. I know there was a lot of opposition to the glass pyramids introduced at the Louvre, to which then now people feel affectionate about it. I mean, the Eiffel Tower itself, people hated it. Ruined the Paris skyline. Eyesore, get rid of it. It was bitterly opposed. It's now the French national icon. But I don't think we can say the same about this crane. I don't think it's ever going to be an emblem of Italy. I think it's best gone.
One thing I noticed when I was in Rome a few weeks ago is that some of the most beautiful, hugely important places in the city, and I think I've mentioned this before on the radio, have become subject to almost impromptu enormous adverts by luxury houses. So if you stand at the top of the Piazza di Spagna, stand at the top of the Spanish Steps, you look down and there is scaffolding in front of a building which is ostensibly being restored. But instead of having ugly scaffolding, they now have a giant picture of a Gucci advert. And if you go into the Piazza Navona, there's like a 300-foot wide Dua Lipa advertising a brand. And it felt really strange because, Simon, that dominated the skyline in a much more deliberate way than a lousy crane.
It's difficult, isn't it? I think there is a commercial, artistic versus commercial tension here, perhaps, isn't there? That, let's face it, we would rather see a beautiful painting or decoration on a hoarding, wouldn't we, than just a, corrugated iron or whatever. On the other hand, and I suppose advertising brings in some money, but yeah, huge adverts for global brands. I mean, it's not particularly appealing to anybody, is it? And I do wonder whether one of the reasons why people do this is they're going to make some money out of it. I mean, scaffolding, apparently, from my own experience of living in an apartment block, is expensive to put up, but quite cheap to rent. So actually, once you've got it up there, you may as well leave it there for a while. If you can earn some money from LVMH with their advertising, then why not?
What about you? Where would you sort of see large-scale things? I know that Marble Arch for a little while was wrapping itself in adverts for a while, and then they went back to a picture of Marble Arch, and it looked rather lovely. It sort of was imbued of a kind of a lightness, a sort of cartoonish element. Where does it add to cities, I wonder?
Well, I think you need to think very carefully. What are you selling? What are you exporting? To go back to the sort of Italian example, are you exporting tourism or are you exporting Gucci? Because if you take over your beautiful tourist sites with great big adverts, you risk prioritising Gucci over tourism. And so I think they need to think carefully, is this actually going to hurt us in the long run? Or is this, the way that we want to go now, that we no longer want people sort of pounding on our historic sites, and so we'll drive them away with some fashion.
Well, we might just buy some nice handbags. What do you think, Simon?
Well, I won't be buying any nice handbags, but I did do a story a couple of years ago, actually, about how luxury houses are supporting architectural restorations. But you mentioned Gucci and you mentioned the Spanish Steps, both are good examples there. So perhaps this is the way forward, but it's got to be done subtly and it's got to be done in a way that is aesthetically pleasing and is in keeping with the environment, I think, hasn't it?
Wise words from Simon Brooke. Thank you so much, Simon and Rainbow Murray, joining me in the studio. Thanks also to my guests Andrew Mueller, Sanam Vakil and James Chambers, and our editorial director Tyler Brûlé. Thanks to our producers Desiree Bandley and Mariella Bevan. Mariella was also our studio engineer. I'm Emma Nelson. Monocle on Sunday is back at the same time next week, but until then, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Goodbye. Thank you for listening.